Margaret Hayes had weathered 73 years on this earth with quiet dignity. Her silver hair, carefully styled each morning, framed a face that put the lines of both laughter and sorrow. She wore her favorite pearl necklace today, the one her late husband Thomas had given her on their 40th anniversary. She sat at her son David's dining table, her weathered hands folded in her lap, listening. Across from her, David's wife Nicole was speaking, her voice dripping with contempt. That old lady is good for nothing but paying our bills, Nicole said to David, not even bothering to lower her voice. David laughed. Actually laughed. Margaret felt the words pierce through her chest like shards of ice. She had moved in with them 6 months ago, after Thomas passed. She had sold her home, the house where she'd raised David, where every room held memories. She'd given David and Nicole nearly everything from that sale to help with their mortgage, their car payments, their credit card debt that seemed to grow each month. She stayed quiet. She always stayed quiet. That night, Margaret lay in the small guest room they'd given her, staring at the ceiling. The moon cast long shadows across the walls. She thought about Thomas, about how he would have handled this. But Thomas was gone, and she was alone. She thought about her life, about working double shifts as a nurse to put David through college, about the sacrifices she and Thomas had made, the vacations they never took, the dreams they deferred, all so their son could have better opportunities. And this was her reward, to be mocked in her own son's home. Something shifted inside Margaret that night. Not anger, exactly, but clarity. A quiet determination that she hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Margaret woke early. She dressed carefully, putting on her navy blue dress and her pearls. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. She remembered something Thomas used to say. Respect is earned, Maggie, but it also must be demanded. By 9 o'clock, Margaret had made 3 phone calls. The first was to her attorney, Henry Morrison, who had handled her and Thomas's affairs for 30 years. Henry, she said, her voice steady. I need to make some changes. Immediately. The second call was to her bank. The third was to her nephew James, who lived 2 states away, but had always stayed in touch. Always remembered her birthday, always asked if she needed anything. Why? Noon. Margaret had opened a new bank account in her name only. She transferred every dollar she had given David and Nicole, or rather, what remained of it. She also cancelled the credit card she'd foolishly added David to as an authorized user. She worked methodically, calmly. There was no rage, no shouting, just quiet, purposeful action. That afternoon, David came home for lunch, something he rarely did. Nicole was with him. They seemed agitated. "Mom," David said. His face flushed. "Why are all the cards blocked?" "We couldn't pay for lunch." People were staring. It was humiliating. Margaret looked up from her tea. She met his eyes, and for the first time in months, she didn't look away. "Sit down, David," she said quietly. The authority in her voice made him pause. He and Nicole sat. "Yesterday," Margaret began, her voice calm but firm, "I heard what Nicole said about me. That I'm good for nothing but paying your bills." Nicole's face went pale. David opened his mouth, but Margaret raised her hand. "You laughed, David. Your wife insulted your mother, and you laughed." The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. "I raised you better than this," Margaret continued. "Your father and I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities we never had. We taught you about respect, about kindness, about family." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I am not an ATM. I am not a convenience. I am your mother, and I deserved better than to be mocked in your home." David's face crumpled. "Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. We were stressed about money, and I wasn't thinking. That's the problem, David. You weren't thinking. Not about me, not about respect, not about what's truly important." She stood, smoothing her dress. "I've made arrangements to stay with your cousin James. He's driving down this weekend to help me move my things." "No, Mom, please," David said, standing abruptly. "Don't go." "I'm sorry." "We're sorry." Nicole sat frozen, shame written across her face. Margaret looked at her son, this man she'd loved from his first breath, and felt her heart break a little. "I love you, David. I always will. But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. Your father taught me that too." Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. David called every morning and every evening. At first, his apologies were rushed, desperate. But gradually, they became more thoughtful. He talked about stress, about how he'd lost sight of what mattered, about taking her for granted. Nicole wrote Margaret a letter. A real letter, handwritten on cream-colored paper. In it, she apologized without excuses. She wrote about her own shame, about growing up in a home where money was love, about how she'd never learned the difference until now. Margaret read the letter 3 times, sitting in her new room at James's comfortable ranch house. The afternoon sun streamed through lace curtains that reminded her of her old home. She thought about forgiveness, about grace, about whether people could truly change. 2 weeks later, Margaret agreed to have dinner with David and Nicole at a restaurant neutral ground. They came with flowers. Not expensive ones, but a simple bouquet of daisies. Margaret's favorite, MOM, David said, his voice thick with emotion. I've been going to therapy. We both have, together and separately. Nicole nodded. We want to understand why we acted that way, why we let ourselves become people we're ashamed of. Margaret listened. She watched their faces, looked for sincerity in their eyes. I don't need your money, MOM, David continued. I never did. I need to be a man my father would have respected. A son you can be proud of. Tears rolled down Margaret's cheeks. Not tears of pain this time, but something more complex. Hope, perhaps, or possibility. It won't be easy, Margaret said softly. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. We know, Nicole said. We understand if you need time, or space, or if you can never fully forgive us, but we want to try. We want to earn back your respect. Margaret reached across the table and took their hands. David's hand was so much like Thomas's had been strong, warm. Nicole's hand trembled slightly. Then we'll try, Margaret said. Together. The months that followed weren't perfect. There were awkward moments, difficult conversations, times when old patterns threatened to resurface. But there was also something new, honesty, accountability, real effort. David got a second job to pay off their debts. Nicole started volunteering at a senior center, learning to see older adults not as burdens, but as people with wisdom and stories. And Margaret, she stayed with James but visited David and Nicole regularly, on her terms, with dignity intact. One evening, nearly a year after that terrible day, Margaret sat in David's living room. The room had changed, less clutter, more warmth. Photos of family, including several of Thomas, adorned the walls. David brought her tea without being asked, remembering she liked honey but no sugar. MOM, he said, sitting beside her. Thank you. For what, dear? For teaching me the hardest lesson, that love without respect isn't really love at all. And that sometimes the most loving thing someone can do is walk away until the other person learns to do better. Margaret squeezed his hand. Your father would be proud of you, David, not for being perfect, but for being willing to grow. As Margaret looked at her son, at the man he was becoming, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. She had fought the hardest battle not with weapons or rage, but with quiet dignity and firm boundaries. She had taught her son that kindness doesn't mean being a doormat, and that love means expecting better from those we care about. Sometimes, the greatest victory comes not from revenge, but from refusing to accept less than we deserve. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is simply to walk away until others learn to walk beside us with respect. Margaret smiled, sipped her tea, and felt Thomas's presence in the room, proud and loving, reminding her that she had always been stronger than she knew.